Have you ever wondered what Jesus was doing for 18 years of his life? The Bible tells us about his birth, a story from when he was 12, and then suddenly, he's 30, beginning his ministry. But what happened in between? This huge gap from age 12 to 30 is often called the lost years. It's one of the most fascinating mysteries in history, and today, we're going to explore it together. Let's start with what we know for sure. The Gospel of Luke gives us our last glimpse of young Jesus. He's 12 years old, in Jerusalem for Passover with his family. When Mary and Joseph head home, they realize he's not with their group. After 3 days of frantic searching, they find him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening and asking incredible questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding. When his parents found him, he simply said, "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" After that, Luke tells us he went back to Nazareth with them, was obedient, and grew in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. And then, silence. For 18 years, the canonical Gospels say nothing more until he appears at the Jordan River to be baptized by John. So where did he go? What was he doing? The most widely accepted and simplest explanation is that he stayed in Nazareth. In that culture, a boy would typically follow in his father's footsteps. Joseph was a tekton, a Greek word often translated as carpenter, but it more broadly means a craftsman or artisan who worked with wood, stone, or metal. So it's highly likely Jesus spent these years learning the family trade, working alongside Joseph and his brothers. He would have been a part of the local community, attending synagogue on the Sabbath, studying the Torah, and living a normal, devout Jewish life. This silent period would have been a time of quiet growth, of maturing from a boy into a man, preparing for the immense mission that lay ahead. This theory makes sense. It grounds Jesus in his culture and community, showing him as someone who understood the daily struggles of the common person because he was one. His parables are filled with imagery of everyday life, sowing seeds, fishing, building houses, things he would have been intimately familiar with if he had stayed in Galilee. But this simple explanation hasn't stopped people from exploring other, more adventurous possibilities. The idea that Jesus traveled during these years is captivating. Why? Because when he begins his ministry, his teachings seem so profound, so revolutionary. Could he have gained some of this wisdom from other cultures? One of the most persistent theories is that Jesus traveled east along the Silk Road, to India and Tibet. Proponents of this idea, which gained popularity in the 19th century, suggest he studied with Hindu gurus and Buddhist monks. They point to similarities between his teachings like love your neighbor and turn the other cheek, and the Eastern concepts of compassion and nonviolence. A Russian journalist named Nicholas Notovich first published this claim in 1894 in a book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. He said that while recovering from a broken leg in a monastery in Ladakh, he was shown ancient texts that described the life of a saint named Issa, who they claimed was Jesus. According to these texts, Issa traveled to India in his teens, studied the Vedas, preached against the caste system, and then journeyed through Nepal and Tibet before returning to Judea. Is this true? Well, modern scholars have overwhelmingly debunked Notovich's claims. When later investigators went to the same monastery, the monks had no knowledge of either Notovich or the manuscripts he described. The story seems to be a fabrication. However, the idea itself has never fully gone away because it's so intriguing. The parallels between some of Jesus' teachings and Eastern philosophy are real, but most scholars believe this is more likely a case of parallel thinking, great minds in different cultures arriving at similar profound truths about humanity and ethics. Another theory suggests Jesus traveled to Egypt. This is a bit more grounding in the biblical narrative itself. After all, Matthew's Gospel tells us that as a baby, Jesus was taken to Egypt by his family to escape King Herod. Egypt, especially the city of Alexandria, was a major center of learning at the time. It had a huge Jewish population and a famous library. It was a place where Greek philosophy, Egyptian mysticism, and Jewish theology all mingled. It's plausible that Jesus could have returned there to study. Some point to a group known as the Therapeutae, a Jewish community of ascetics living near Alexandria, whose lifestyle of contemplation and healing shares some resemblances with the Essenes and the later Christian monastic tradition. Could Jesus have spent time with them, honing his spiritual discipline? While there's no direct evidence, it's a compelling thought. Let's talk about another group I just mentioned, the Essenes. This was a Jewish mystical sect that lived in ascetic communal settlements, most famously at Qumran near the Dead Sea, the very place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. The Essenes were intensely devout. They practiced ritual purity, shared their possessions, and dedicated themselves to studying scripture and awaiting the Messiah. Their teachings and lifestyle have some striking parallels with what we see later in both John the Baptist's ministry and the early Christian community. For example, they practiced ritual immersion in water, similar to baptism. They had a communal meal of bread and wine. And their writings speak of a teacher of righteousness. Because of these similarities, some have speculated that Jesus, and possibly John the Baptist, spent time with the Essene community. It's a fascinating possibility that would place Jesus within a deeply spiritual and somewhat radical Jewish movement during his lost years. This would have been a period of intense spiritual training, away from the hustle and bustle of Galilee, deep in the Judean desert. So we have these different theories: Jesus the carpenter in Nazareth, Jesus the traveler in India, Jesus the scholar in Egypt, or Jesus the mystic with the Essenes. Why does it even matter? Why are we so fascinated by these lost years? It matters because this period is the bridge between the gifted child in the temple and the charismatic teacher who changed the world. What happened during these years shaped the man he became and the message he delivered. If he was a carpenter, it emphasizes his humanity and his connection to the working class. His parables about building on rock versus sand take on a very personal meaning. If he traveled, it suggests a more universal, inclusive foundation for his teachings, influenced by the wisdom of the world. If he studied with rabbis or ascetics, it highlights his deep roots in the Jewish spiritual traditions of his time. Ultimately, the Bible's silence on this period might be intentional. The Gospel writers weren't trying to write a complete day-by-day biography of Jesus. Their goal was to testify to his identity and to record his teachings, his ministry, his death, and his resurrection. For them, the most important part of the story began when he stepped onto the public stage at age 30. Perhaps the lost years are lost because in the grand scheme of his mission, they were years of private preparation. They were his time to grow, to learn, to work, and to deepen his relationship with God, away from the public eye. The mystery itself invites us to reflect. It allows us to see Jesus not just as a divine figure, but as a young man finding his way, preparing for his destiny. The truth is, we may never know for sure what happened during those 18 years. There are no lost chapter of the Bible waiting to be discovered that will fill in all the blanks. But by exploring the possibilities, we get a richer, more nuanced picture of the world Jesus lived in and the person he might have been. Whether he was planing wood in a workshop debating scholars in a far-off land or praying in the desert, these were the years that forged the man who would walk out of Nazareth and begin a ministry that would forever alter the course of human history. The silence doesn't have to be an empty space. It can be a space for wonder, reflection, and a deeper appreciation for the journey he took. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration today. What do you think happened during Jesus' lost years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video and want to dive into more historical and spiritual mysteries, please give it a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.